As you can probably tell, something I love to do on this channel is to highlight some indie fighting games, whether you've heard of them or not. There's a lot of super cool indie fighters that I don't think get the love they deserve, and today I'd like to take a moment to talk about one of my favorite recent indie fighters, Uchu Mega Fight. But part of why it's so cool to me is that it takes after my favorite NES game. The problem is, that game never left Japan, which is a huge shame seeing as it shows some potential the NES had for a very underrepresented genre. Because of this, I'd like to start by introducing you to an amazing retro fighting game you may not know much about, Joy Mecha Fight. Joy Mecha Fight, sometimes just called Joy Mech Fight, is a Famicom game released in 1993 by Nintendo themselves. As previously mentioned, the game received no international release and to this day has not bridged the gap. The game is available on the Famicom Switch Online app, but despite being not a very text-heavy game, it doesn't appear on the NES Online version. Of course, fan translations exist, and that's what you're seeing here. The story of this game is that these two scientists, Little Ermin and Ivan Warner, who used to be friends and made robots together. One day, Ivan steals all of the robots and goes on a rampage with them for world domination, with the exception of one, the comedy robot Sukapon. Despite not being suitable for combat, Ermin fixes up the robot and makes him able to fight these other robots as the last hope against these newfound enemies. Is this just the plot of Mega Man? Yeah, pretty much, but it works fine. Probably the biggest selling point of a fighting game is the roster, and this is actually a big reason why there aren't too many NES fighting games. Fighting game characters have a ton of sprites, and cramming them all onto one cartridge is often very difficult. And yet, Joy Mech Fight has 36 characters, a crazy number that was unheard of at the time for any console. How did they pull it off? Well, if you look at the characters, you'll notice they're all made of segmented parts, sort of like Rayman. To give each robot its own identity, all of them have a defined face sprite, but the rest of the parts are left unassembled and are instead animated with code to save memory. This was a really smart move, as not only does this give players more options, but it also allowed the developers to animate the characters with these really exaggerated poses and hit effects. While some of the basic punches could use some more movement, everything else looks pretty good. The music is also amazing! You can really tell the dev team knew what they were doing. The only thing I'm a little iffy on about the presentation is how much of the roster is locked. Out of the 36 characters, you start with only 8 of them. You unlock 24 more characters by beating the game on the hard difficulty, and after that, you unlock the last 4 by beating the game on the final special difficulty. You don't unlock these characters by beating each chapter, only by clearing the entire story. What's especially weird about this is that the last characters you fight in story mode are supposed to be variations of the starting roster, and having them just dumped on you with the other characters doesn't make them seem special, more just like clones they added to pad the roster out. And speaking of story mode, we should probably talk about the modes. The game offers the basic modes, but a few of them are in a weird way, since this was long before there was a set standard. You have your player versus player and player versus CPU modes, alongside a CPU versus CPU mode, and of course, the story mode. In the story mode, you only start with Sukapon, but slowly get all of the starting robots back, and fight through sets of 8 robots until you fight the boss. It's very simple, but it's slightly more in-depth than your average arcade mode, and it's fun to experiment with the cast. Of course, you may be wondering about a certain staple mode, and don't worry, training mode is here. Kinda. In story mode and player versus CPU, you can pick a character and open a basic training room. You can try out all their moves as well as get tutorials on your character's special moves. It's very basic, but I also don't think that for this game in particular, a better training mode is necessarily needed. You see, Joy Mecha Fight is an incredibly simple game gameplay-wise. The game is designed without combos, making the game revolve mostly around keeping up pressure to land your strong options. Each character in the game has a total of 10 moves. A punch, a kick, a good punch that covers more forward space, a sweep, a jumping variation of the punch and kick, a throw, and 3 special moves. The normals tend to be similar among the cast, but aren't exactly the same. Some characters kick higher, some punch further distances, some are faster, and so on and so forth. Something that may feel bad at first, but also provides an interesting spacing challenge is that the hitboxes of moves are directly tied to the sprite. so moves that reach far can have some abusable blind spots, meaning that coverage is more important than just range. While I haven't played the game competitively or anything, it seems like the game has two major playstyles. The first of these are characters with a very strong projectile game. These characters tend to sit back, either trying to chip the opponent out, or forcing the opponent to approach and challenge you. Something to note is that the game does not have a corner on any of the stages, so zoners are free to run away as much as they want. Or, they could if not for the second type of playstyle. The other character archetype is based around brutally fast movement tools, often having the ability to traverse the stage in unreactable times. Not only that, but the best of these characters often have safe ways to get off a throw. There is no way to tech throws in this game, so if you get grabbed, you have to take it. Lastly, it's worth noting that the game doesn't have rounds. Instead, each character has 3 lives. When one is lost, the opponent heals a small amount of HP and the match continues. There's no timer either. You have to take all 3 lives to win. Honestly, the lack of corner and time would make this game a bit of a mess, especially with a lack of high-low blocking. However, it avoids this gate by how much they double down. Characters in this game are absolutely unhinged, with moves that do 25% of your health, pseudo-infamous, absurd cross-ups, some absolutely wild control options. Everyone wants to constantly lay the hurt on each other, and even the zoners have fantastic tools to keep the fight fast and interesting. Overall, I love Joy Mecha Fight, and it's a shame the game never got more love over here. It's from an era where developers hadn't really figured out the fighting game genre yet, and the result was something that definitely aged, but has such a unique charm to it. The game has a very small but dedicated community to this day. I'd love to see Nintendo come back to this franchise, though I doubt it's in the cards. Of course, this doesn't mean the legacy of this game died out, as other people who loved it will continue to push the ideas it presented into their own works. And that leads us to the indie spiritual successor to the concept, Uchu Mega Fight. Uchu Mega Fight is a free browser fighting game created in 2021 by developer Uchu. The game was made using the Pico 8 Fantasy console. If you're not familiar, Pico 8 is a program designed to emulate a late 90s handheld, with a lot of the same limitations. The advantage to this is that it makes games very lightweight that load fast and feel super responsive, but using that for a fighting game is still pretty dang impressive. The game doesn't have a huge focus on story. From what I gather, the wacky cast of characters are trying to stop an alien invasion or something. It doesn't really matter, as there's not really a big focus on the story like there was in Joy Mecha Fight. Just by looking at the characters, the Joy Mecha Fight influence is evident. Goofy looking characters with really exaggerated animations thanks to their detached limbs. But the game isn't just trying to be a Joy Mecha Fight fan game. As the website puts it, which, side note, is really cool, it's got a lot of info and move lists and reminds me of old Nintendo websites. Anyway, Uchu Mega Fight respects Joy Mecha Fight, and that's a really good way to put it. Probably one of the most evident parts of this is present in Uchu's big gimmick, the style select. The game only has 10 characters, and while there's certainly more in depth, this may seem as a bit small compared to the roster of the previous game we discussed. However, each character has 3 styles, Normal, Joy, and Choi. While these styles look similar and may share a few things, for the most part they have different appearances, moves, and even playstyles. Think like Melty Blood's Moon system, but even more fleshed out. Normal characters are designed to play more like a traditional fighter. They have links and cancels between their punches and kicks, and have the ability to cancel their specials into each other once per combo, providing potentially the most diverse combo routes. While all the gameplay is pretty simple, these are the characters that likely have the most to lab out. Choi characters are unique in that they don't have a punch and kick button, but rather a normal and special button. The gameplay is designed to be a bit like platform fighter inputs, featuring an auto combo that can be cancelled into command normals or special moves. These characters often have quick but rewarding combos, as well as easy access to powerful special moves at the push of a button. But if you don't feel like hitting the lab at all and just want to hit people hard, the Joy style is up your alley, based on, you guessed it, Joy Mecha Fight. This style offers the standard punch and kick buttons, except with no combos whatsoever, making weaker pokes much more limited compared to the other styles. In exchange, you gain access to the highest damage attacks in the game, with some brutal normals and specials. And if you really want to push your luck, you can do a special input with both attack buttons to do a Mega Special, which is much slower, but can do brutal damage, with the strongest characters able to kill in 2 touches. The slow speed may make it impractical, but the threat is still quite scary. A lot of the Joy characters have special moves that pay homage to Joy Mecha Fight, which I really enjoy. Overall, these 3 variations brings the cast up to a whopping 29. Yeah, 29, I'm not counting the tiny stickman that has like no moves and dies, as funny as he is. But even still, the game isn't done, so there's potential for even more. At least one more is confirmed to be on the way, with the second character from Auto5's game, Robo-O, being in the cards. If you couldn't tell from the styles, the gameplay is very much geared towards simplicity. One part of this I really like is that attacks can be held down to turbo the button, allowing you to perform links better using the buffer to reduce the needed precision. The one issue with this is that a lot of moves aren't explicitly cancelable on hit, so the system can make it easy to accidentally cancel an attack before it makes contact. And yeah, this can lead to some funny shenanigans and mix-ups, but the game does not distinguish between high-low blocking, so it's not always that big of a deal other than frame traps and command grabs. And speaking of grabs, while not as insane as they were in Joy Mecha Fight, grabs are still untechable, making them a very important tool to get around overly defensive players. Then again, you have a lot of ways to inflict tons of chip damage, and while chip cannot kill, it's still worth keeping in mind. Overall, while I still love both, I think this game's gameplay is leagues better than Joy Mecha Fight. The main reason for this is that this game has a better use of normals. In Joy Mecha Fight, matches often boil down to throwing out your specials as much as possible, as they're usually your strongest tools in both damage and pressure. While this can sometimes be true for the Joy-style characters in Uchu, they're also often given much better normals that expand their pressure, greatly diversifying their gameplay. Uchu Mega Fight also has a great variety of gameplay modes. Of course, the standard PvP and versus CPU modes are here, as well as an arcade mode. The arcade mode has 3 difficulties with an unlockable 4th, as well as minigames to break up the pace and endings for all the characters. There's a pretty comprehensive training mode that has all sorts of features rivaling most AAA fighters, alongside combo trials for the normal characters. The Joy characters are currently unsupported, but have support planned in the future. Joy characters, well, you can't really do much with those, well. But the last category is Challenges, which is home to a lot of smaller modes, such as Survival, Time Attack, the Save the Earth minigame, and a special mode that rotates with each update. Currently, it's a preset gauntlet of enemies that you have to take on using Blue Moon. These modes, as well as arcade mode, do have online leaderboards, so that's pretty cool. Unfortunately, there's not an online mode, but considering this is a Pico 8 game, I doubt that's even possible. But all in all, I absolutely love this game. In fact, just making this video, I probably spent double the time I intended to playing it. I just couldn't put it down. Honestly, the only thing I want out of this game is a desktop release. The browser version is definitely convenient, but it'd be even better if I had a more reliable way of playing this without an internet connection. I'd be more than willing to spend a few bucks on this. If you told me this was a $5 Steam release, I'd believe you and buy it in a heartbeat. If you'd like to see me talk about this game more, let me know. I'd love to go in depth with all the characters, and I might just go ahead and do that anyways, just because of how much I love this game. To wrap things up, I think Uchu Mega Fight really shows just how great you can get from someone picking up an idea and just going far with it. Joy Mecha Fight is an interesting game in its own right. It has some really cool ideas for the time, but it's certainly aged and doesn't really hold up compared to modern games in the genre. However, the way Uchu modernizes the ideas presented, both with the Joy style as well as some of the overall mechanics and aesthetics, just really shows how much the potential the ideas really had. Maybe one day we'll see Nintendo's take on the formula, but I'm really amazed at what an indie developer with a lot of dedication could pull off. I really want to see what Uchuzin's future projects will look like, so hopefully this isn't the last we see of this developer. For now though, I think I've said all there is to say. If you're interested in Uchu, the link to the game is in the description. It even works on mobile. It's not optimal, but you can do it. Check it out and let me know what you think. Until next time, I bid you adieu.